Hi, I'm Mark Roberts. Welcome to my YouTube station. Hello everyone, welcome to the old station. I'm here today with Rabea.
Hello.
And we've finally got round to doing this mix breakdown, a Toska mix breakdown.
After a long time in the making and a lot of requests.
Yeah, so we've gone with Abomasum.
We have. Thank you for everyone that asked. Well, actually, I asked you. And thank you for everyone that gave us suggestions. And Abomasum was by far and away the most requested.
Yeah. And it's a dense mix, this one.
That is dense.
So we've got a fair bit to cover in a short time. Mm-hmm. They're all pretty dense mixes, really. And it'll become clear it's all... Not all these tracks are playing at once. It's all kind of pieces in a bigger puzzle. But we'll try and get through as much as we can on this one. If there's anything that needs more detail, I think I'm going to make some other videos where I perhaps just look at some guitar sounds specifically, drum sounds, etc. So if there's anything you want a bit more detail on, please just comment and I'll see what I can do.
Awesome. I'm particularly looking forward to going back in after what's nearly... I guess it'd be a year and a half-ish since we finished mixing it, to just listen to layers that I'd forgotten were there, be able to solo and just listen to the finished sound of, say, the bass or the drums, because when you're actually doing it, you're not really sat there just listening to how nice it sounds, are you? You're mixing it. Yeah. So at this point, being able to solo it and listen to it and go, oh wow, yeah, that's how it all amounted to that sound is going to be quite interesting.
Yeah, I think. And I think it's in the tracking stage and the mixing stage, you get in that kind of tunnel vision. Like in the tracking stage, we would have spent pretty much the first day experimenting and getting all these sounds. And then as you're going through the songs, you kind of have this key, so we kind of know our heavy rhythms are roughly going to be this amp and this cab. And then when you're doing the more kind of creative atmospheric stuff, you've got other things set up, and you just end up in that blur of it, don't you? And it's quite nice to sort of look back and see what we actually did and how some of those sounds came about. And things often sound quite different in isolation as well once you've mixed them. Yeah, they're not the sounds that you come up with, are they?
No, sometimes surprisingly so. You're like, does the guitar really sound that thin on its own? But when you put it in the mix, it suddenly sounds like monstrous. It sounds like a million Spartans running at you 100 miles an hour with chariots. You know what I mean? It's like, it's such a stark contrast when it's sat in the mix than when it's on its own sometimes, especially some things. But and the cool thing with this track as well that we get to break this one down is it's almost like it's in two parts, because like the first half of this song is more or less clean, ambient, there's like a lot of ambience about it, and then the second half it's like gets a lot thicker and heavier and bigger, and you know, there's a big drop in it and stuff like that.
Definitely, there's lots going on in this one,
so we should delve right in.
Let's dip ourselves in. Alright guys, so here we are facing in the other direction so that we can hear the music. So we're going to start off with having a quick look at the drums, okay? And for this song, as Bea said, it's kind of split into two quite distinct sections. Like the intro and everything's quite clean and atmospheric, and then it gets brutal, more and more epic and brutal towards the end. And for this reason, when I was mixing, I treated it as two different drum kits. So although it's the same drum recording, at the time you would have tracked it, I don't think there was any difference in the actual kit.
No, it's the same kit, just I think it was at your end where we had to do that. I think at the time he just sort of played through the song. Yeah,
and the reason for this is to make a kit cut through a big dense mix, you have to do a bit more to it in terms of compression, etc. So just a slightly more naturalistic tone at the beginning, and then a bit more processing going on later on. So I just split it into two. Just as a sort of overlook, those of you who know Pro Tools, or maybe you mix in other DAWs and stuff, will see there's an awful lot of plugins going on. I mean, that is just the case with the way I mix, and a lot of it is lots of small incremental stages. I don't try and do too much with one plugin. So particularly towards the end of a mix, when you're just making slight adjustments, I will end up putting just another EQ plugin on just for a little bit of brightness or something like that. So these are all really small moves. They're
kind
not
of stack it all together so that the end result is how you, rather than affecting something you're already happy with the way it sounds, and not being able to, and not having to reverse that, you just add it instead.
Yeah, and that can come down to where you've got it in the chain, because you might have an EQ before something else, a saturator or something like that.
That affects it a certain way.
Yeah. So that's why in some cases there's an awful lot of plugins going on. There's a couple of triggers on the drums as well. They were fairly sort of subtle, and they're much more, they play a supporting role. It's kind of drum augmentation rather than any kind of replacement going on. And it's just on the kick and snare. There's nothing going on the toms.
Nice.
Okay, so let's have a quick listen to kit number 1 and see what you think.
Nice.
Yeah.
They sound really you can really hear the room from Middle Farm there.
Yeah.
Massively.
And this is part of the thing as well with this processing being slightly different. Like, you don't want to be gating things too hard and stuff. You want it to sound quite natural. So I guess to start with, should we listen to that second kit and just for a sort of contrast on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it just, for me, like, to my ear, that's just way more presence in the close mics, if that makes sense. Like, they're way more present audibly.
Yeah.
Like, I'm hearing way more kick and snare, like dry mic, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
To me, at least.
And that's the necessary thing to get it cutting through. And there's still loads of that room going on. And if anything, it's more compressed so that it kind of brings out the detail of the room. But at the same time, these close mics, like you said, need to kind of cut through a little bit more. So yeah, that's the main difference in those two. It's the same kit. I could have easily used just one kind of drum mix, if you like, and automated all these little moves. But it was just much easier in context for me to mix the heavy drums and then mix the not so heavy drums. Right, so I'll just break that down a little bit just so that you can see what's going on in the kit. So let's start with the kick drum. We're feeding an auxiliary with the different mics we had on the kit. So we had an in mic in the kit, and then an outer microphone, and then a sub kick, which looks like a speaker. It basically is a speaker wired in the opposite way, so it becomes a microphone, which just grabs some of the really low end sub energy. And that's just being sent to a bus here. So that's what the actual kick drum sounded like once it had been processed. So you can hear it's quite heavily gated. This is from the more heavy section of the song, so you want that to really cut through. The triggers that I added to this, we've got one here. And that's just some more consistent kind of
soft
low endy thing that was just supporting it. So here's those together.
So would it be right in saying that you find the most present kick sound where you get most of the character of the clickiness, and then you'll reinforce it with something softer, warmer, and sort of thuddier?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And you know, to be honest, we could have just mixed this with the natural mic and it would be fine, but like especially for this section here, we're going for a larger than life sound, so that's just tucked in underneath the natural kick to make sure every one of those is really consistent, and it just thickens it up a little bit. And then we've got another trigger which is just a room sound. And that just helps me to keep that whole roomy vibe to the whole thing. Without, if I just turn the room mics up, I'll be bringing up a load of other stuff that I don't want. So this is often, with a good drum recording, when I do use triggers like this, is to accentuate certain aspects of the kit. So I want a bit more room on the drum sound, but I don't want to just turn the room mics off. So it's just about control, really. Similar vibe with the snare. So on the snare close, it's just top and bottom. And that's the bell brass.
The Gretsch bell brass, the
Gretsch
best
bell brass.
snare on the planet, in my opinion. The best snare on the planet, in my opinion.
Yeah, so that one's working. You know, that's doing the most of the heavy lifting. In this heavy section again, we've triggered something that's just a bit more roomy. Okay, and those both together. Okay, and that would have been a combination of samples that I've recorded in that room, just to sort of maintain
the farm.
The farm, yeah.
Farm maintenance, man.
Yeah. So that's the most kind of trickery going on, and the rest of it is just to do with the drum mix itself. The most important aspect really being the room. So
okay,
yeah, let's have a listen to, this is a close room mic, and this is the R88. It's an AEA R88 ribbon mic.
Oh, it's the big black, like
the long egg.
Yeah.
So that's this one in the middle of the room. Okay, and then we've got some distant mics, which were AKG 414s at the back of the room, facing onto the stone wall. So it's both together. So for me, that's kind of where most of our drum sound's coming from, and everything else is filling in the details and giving it more, the detail.
I mean, it makes sense. It's the most important factor, because that's why we went to Middle Farm, because their live room is so good, and you can quite clearly hear there how the dry or close mics will sit within that, and the whole thing will sound really lovely.
Yeah, definitely. And they would have been compressed a bit on the way in. There's all I've got going on there is a little bit of EQ, just to pull out some frequencies here and there. Other than that, there's a kind of parallel compressor that's just taking most of the overall drum mix. It's mainly the close mics with a bit of room and stuff, again just to reinforce that slam, if you like. And then there's these plugins here are just kind of various saturators and things, all doing lots of little moves like we said. Thought I'd just sort of play the whole drum mix and introduce those.
Yeah, so it really makes a difference how it glues all those elements together. Yeah,
definitely. And I add a lot of this stuff, so I'll mix the overall drum kit, no samples, anything like that, get a nice drum sound overall, and then I'll sort of do a bit of a top-down mix. So I'll put a bit of kind of compression, desk emulation and things like that, and mix into that tape emulation. I kind of got my own kind of formula of stuff that I use for that. Take too long to go into too much detail with all that, but yeah, that's kind of how I do it. And then the reinforcements from the samples and things like that come later if needed.
Nice.
Okay, so let's look at the bass guitar now. There's sort of three different sounds on this track for different sections of the song. So we have the clean bass sound at the start. show. That's the clean guy, and then things get a bit more dirty. I think this is a dirty boy. H bass stands for heavy.
Oh man, I remember that was we had a fuzz on that bass.
Yeah,
you can really hear that.
So that was a specific tone that we used for that
heavy
section.
There's one sound I really want to hear.
What's that?
And that's the snarly bass sound in the drop.
Is it the...
I just remember where it drops and it comes in, it's just the most disgusting bass sound. I want to hear it. Yeah,
okay.
This is...
It's all about that.
It's the way it rattles.
Yeah, and I think that's a case of hearing something in isolation where it does sound a little bit weird in some ways. Like, it's about the combination of that bass sound and the kick and what the guitars are doing that kind of give it that overall thing. If we took the processing off that, it'd probably sound quite different.
Yeah, it's going to sound really weird now.
Might sound better.
To be honest, it doesn't sound that much different. What it sounds like is you've given it the kind of low end and the body and the definition that it needs in a mix. Because to me, that just sounds similar, but like less magnified into the qualities of what it needs to sit.
Yeah, and that's the thing I was saying. Like, you know, I've used every instance of plugin there, but you know, the first one would just be some subtractive EQ, then a little bit of saturation, bit of compression, bit of limiting. And then these would be smaller moves. There's a bit of R bass bringing out some bottom end. This compressor would be key to the kick drum. So every time the kick hits, it just dips the bass ever so slightly. And then this EQ would just be an overall kind of couple of subtle moves.
So minute there, yeah.
Exactly. And then the trim plugin at the end is just automation of volume. So looks like more than it is. A lot of these in the actual mix would have been bounced down to a single stem, like in the intro there.
Were there any instances where the majority of the sound was similar between, let's say, for instance, the bass between the clean and the overdrive, or did you have to treat it as if it was a completely new instrument?
Well, they all had this same combination. So we had two amplifiers running that were mic'd up. We took a clean DI. Pre-pedal DI, which we didn't use at all.
Right.
So this one we didn't use. And then we took a sort of sub, like you would with a sub kick for a kick drum. This was using a Moog envelope filter.
Yeah, it was the Mooga Fuga.
Is it an envelope? Yeah. It's basically just. I'll show you. I shall show you. It's just a really sort of low-endy thing. Here we go. Okay.
So that's literally for sub frequencies, isn't it?
Yeah.
Support.
So there's a bit of that, and then we've got, what's this one? That's a post DI, so that's just not a clean DI. It's a DI with all the pedals on it. And then we're running just a Sans amp as well. And this is an elaborate setup. We actually have room mics as well. Listen to those. We had room mics on everything. Guitars, all of that stuff. The same R88 long egg in the middle of the room.
Yeah, I mean, I remember... It's funny because this is exactly how we wanted to approach it, because I remember at least one of my favourite records is Sound Awake, for the way they went about engineering it and mixing it. And I know that one of Forrester Savile's, who was the engineer on it and the producer, one of his approaches on that was throw everything up and then take away what doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I feel like in some ways, particularly the example here with the bass, this, like you say, it's an elaborate setup, and I think that was part of the approach. Well, we wanted to capture the organic nature of the band sounding like they were playing in a room, but it's still to have the control and power that modern records have.
Yeah.
And I think, if I remember correctly, there was a part of our sort of idea we agreed on was that idea of just chuck stuff up. If it sounds great, wicked. If not, start filtering away the stuff that's making it a problem, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And to get a similar bass sound to Dave's, you wouldn't have to do all this stuff. This isn't a necessity. This is, like you say, this is a thing that we did because we wanted to take what we could and then keep what we needed to. But what these things often become is a kind of composite. They all end up being the sound, so they act a bit like an EQ. So you'd have an amp that's brighter, and then you've got this sub frequency thing happening, and then the post pedal DI is got a really up close sort of gritty sound, so that can provide a bit of detail. And what they become is a kind of an EQ kind of thing. So the blends that we created in the studio when we're finding the tones would have remained like that. So although I've kept these tracks so that you can see here, those blends then inform the guitars we added afterwards and everything like that. So they wouldn't have moved, and they would have been bussed to a single bus like this from the outset. So sometimes, for example, these sounds here, we've got a dirty one. What is this? There's this sound as well that we haven't listened to yet. This is also a heavy bass sound. Okay, that's not a million miles away from the outro bass sound, and I don't think we actually would have done much to the outro, but we might have added a little bit of a pedal or something like that. But
yeah,
what I'm trying to explain is that one might just be a different combination of mics. It might have been favouring a certain amp or something like that. So
rather than a completely different setup.
Yeah, I would have just duplicated that, and we would have moved the faders until we've hopefully found the sound Dave's looking for. And if we can't find that sound, then we would have started playing with pedals and things like that. But the amp setups and everything would have stayed exactly the same.
Perfect.
Right, so let's have a look at some guitars.
Some guitars. And this is going to be intense because, well, in a similar way with the drums, it's kind of split into two, isn't it? You've got your ambient sound and your heavy sound.
Yeah.
But the guitars, obviously, as with most projects, always takes the longest because there are so many layers and fillers and textures and stuff. So it'd be cool to hear the sort of the sort of what made up the clean and the heavy, but then see what stuff we like added just as finesse and stuff like that.
Yeah,
they're always hidden. I can see little bits all over the place that are hidden.
Yeah, that's it. And that's the thing to remember as well. There might be like 80 guitar tracks, but they're not all playing at once.
Yeah.
Okay, let's have a look at the very intro then. So, all right.
So you've got one that sounds less defined, more saturated, and one that's cleaner and thinner.
Yeah, essentially. So that gives us the kind of detail one end, and then the other one's more the reinforcement, I'd say. This clean 2 is probably more the reinforcement. Again, we've got lots of room sort of sounds going on this. So if we listen to this first guitar again, I'll just show you without the room mic. So that's a huge part of it.
That makes a huge difference.
Yeah. It's a room mic on its own. Yeah, so that really adds... that is the kind of vibe of that guitar sound, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that just made it when you turned it on.
Yeah, and you could recreate this kind of thing with reverb and stuff if you want to, just sort of putting a mix to a reverb and EQing it a bit, but obviously we had the room, so we had that room mic up all the time.
Mm.
And when you start layering that room sound up with the drums, with the bass, and with the guitars, it just sort of helps glue it all together. The only other thing going on in that intro by the looks of it is this.
The Les.
So that's really grimy.
Sounds
Leslie.
like the Leslie from Hell.
Yeah. So if let's take that out and then put these in. Yeah, so that definitely adds something to it. It gives it some more clarity, actually.
That's so interesting. That's exactly one of those things I was on about. Didn't really know it was there, but when it's not there, it doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
When you put it back in, and it's like, in isolation even, it's like, why would you have that weird, scratchy like quality that isn't, that's a sound of a Leslie that's not in ship shape.
Yeah.
However, it just makes the atmosphere of the song so quickly.
It's not even mic'd properly. It's kind of just the bottom bit's mic'd, so it's getting that kind of swirly thing, but it's not. I said it provides some clarity to the guitar sound because that kind of raspy saturation of it does, but it's not like a super Leslie sound, is it? So that's pretty cool.
So how about we look at the second verse? There's some nice sort of closely picked guitar parts.
Yeah, let's have a look at those. So that would be this. Okay, so these two here have just been printed, so they would have been a similar blend of things, but these were much closer ones. I think the main sound really is this clean sound, which is what I think we started off with, and then we added the crunch to sort of give it some, because the song's starting to ramp up here.
Yeah.
And then we added a rhythm underneath that's just a bit more washed out. Not a rhythm, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. It's just flatter and more of a bed.
Yeah. Okay, so the only other effect that we had going on is these guitars being sent to a bus that's got a crystallizer on it, essentially, which is a Soundtoys plugin.
Yeah, I remember specifically talking about the idea in the studio at the time, me wanting, anyone that I guess knows what I do on guitar is I love a lot of guitar. I love a lot of reverb and delay all the time. And I remember in the studio, and I'd be dialing in my sound going, yeah, that sounds great, let's go for it. And you'd go, okay, that's not going to work, that's too much like reverb, we might need to dial that back a bit. And later on understanding the reasons why, and knowing that you were going to mess around with some stuff afterwards was something I learned that's really valuable for me now when I mix, is not to overdo it. It's like the same with gain. If you have too much gain on a guitar sound and you start multi-tracking, there's way too much at the end of all your multi-tracking. I feel like it's a similar principle. Yeah,
definitely. And having that, especially when you're stacking up lots of guitar layers and things, I think, if anything, I learnt from you, like on a side note, I learnt from you to be more liberal in some ways with reverb, especially with heavy sounds. It's not something I normally would use, but it definitely adds that epicness. But I think the reason I erred slightly on the side of caution was just to give me a bit more control, especially in the context of having these layered guitars. So what this allowed me to do was send those three guitars to a single reverb, so that we don't have like three different really obvious reverbs going on that are kind of conflicting with each other. And then because it's on a bus, I'm able to EQ it and isolate and pull out things that I don't want. So it's useful to have it on a bus sometimes, like an effects loop of a guitar amp. It's more that kind of effect, isn't it? You're putting it into the reverb, but then it means if it's getting muddy down below, I can put an EQ on and take some of that mud out and things like that.
Rather than being stuck.
Yeah. So I do love to record the actual effect and the pedals and stuff. I just think when you're going for a super reverby sound, it's good to just maybe not go as super reverb. Or if you're recording 2 amps, just go super reverb on one of them so that you've got that control. So let's just listen to that quickly. Yeah.
It makes such a difference. And what's funny is when you stacked it all together, I went, yeah, that's the sound I normally use because it's that wet normally.
Yeah.
And it's just cool that we've achieved that from all those different elements. And that's something that, you know, like yourself, someone with experience that sees the future of how it's going to pan out. That's great. That's quite eye-opening.
Cool.
Heavy guitars.
Heavy guitars. So I guess this point is where we first get the kind of big colossal kick in after all that lovely atmospheric stuff, isn't it?
Particularly with this first section of like heaviness, it's even more so because there's fuzz on there, there's octave. Like live, it's fuzz, octave on a high gain guitar sound in the first place, and there's reverb and delay. So the whole thing is just meant to be just like insane.
Yeah. And when we tracked this, we kind of would have listened to the live tone first and then maybe tried to break it into parts a bit just to give us some more control and hopefully some more size in the mix. So I'll listen to it all together and I'll kind of solo out some bits. Okay, so these are like the two main beef. They're called Beef 1 and Beef 2.
They sound quite angry.
Those are the beefy guys. Okay.
And you can hear there's tons of fuzz and gain.
Yeah, that's it. And there's not loads of reverb or anything on that one at the moment. Then we've got these, which I think are single string versions of the same riff. Yeah, so they've just got an octave on. So those two together kind of... I think that's the main sound for that.
It's huge.
We've got a Leslie guitar as well here.
It's just rolling, it's spinning.
We did that.
Yeah, that's in there.
That's in there. That's
incredible.
Definitely in there.
I love that.
And this is also being backed up by a bit of a synthy boy as well.
That's literally doing what I was saying earlier. Like, you've got, obviously, you can even see it here. You've got your two fuzzy sort of leader parts that are much higher, and then the octave and the synth are almost the same level. And all they do when you put them together is give it that weight I was saying. When you get in your mixes, this weighty, like, thick, powerful, dense sound.
Yeah, because they're just playing a supporting role, really, those. They're not supposed to be... It's not supposed to sound like 4 guitars and a synth.
No.
It's kind of a way of translating what you do live into a recording, so that we've got a bit more control, but it also just sort of brings out those aspects. So that's kind of, you know, you rather than having the octave and everything on that one guitar sound, which would still sound good, it just gives us that control, so we can just have the right amount and focus in on what's good about that octave sound. And
just a bit of EQ and compression, it looks like, on all this stuff.
Yeah. So the main guitars have got a bit of high pass. I would normally probably keep in that type of tone, maybe keep a little bit more low end, but because I knew you've got the octave underneath, it just needs the kind of fundamental bits. Really subtle stuff, a little bit of compression. Still come back to this plugin. It's an oldie but a goodie. And then, just a tiny bit of EQ, more broad stroke EQ and some console emulation.
Wow.
And they're being sent to a bus as well, which is probably a kind of roomy reverb. Yeah, it's just a room sound, which is a bit of alter-verb there.
Wow.
Yeah, that's about that.
And we did actually track this with heavy sounds as well, didn't we? With a lot of reverb and delay. We actually...
Yeah. On some of the sounds, definitely. I'm not sure. Some of these beefy ones are a bit closer sounding, aren't they? But most of the effects that you would use, we used. It's just when we were talking before about the reverb buses and stuff, I think I was just asking you to be a bit more conservative just because we're layering up, rather than trying to achieve the whole thing from one tone on the record. So let's have a look at a different heavy riffy section that kind of gives us hopefully a bit of a contrast.
It's literally 2.
Yeah. And that's getting everything we need. So we didn't need to sort of bolster it in any way.
So we used a dual amp rig on either side. It was a Kraken by Victory on both sides, but then it was blended with a Diesel VH4 and a KSR something that begins with O. And we always, wasn't it 2 cabs, 2 heads?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah, we had a different... we'd sort of shot out between different guitars, so I think we decided, the left side was going to be the Kraken and the
one type of baritone.
Yeah, and then the other another. And you can see those two I just played. Those are, have been bounced down to a single track here, and this one is a stereo track. So there's probably some room mic information in that one.
But it's ultimately 2 performances.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, one left and one right. And some of these have still got the labels on, so that was this is one guitar sound, these green ones here, and that would have been, it just says what the pre's are kind of thing, vintage on a Mesa cab, OPI on a Mesa cab with a ribbon mic,
and it's just
Vintech Zilla 57, Zilla 421, so that's just 2 cabs, 2 mics on each cab, and then a stereo room mic.
It's amazing considering how fat that section is.
Yeah, that's what I think it's important to remember when you're like layering stuff. It's not always more is more. It's sometimes more is more.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to create this big sound and it's got different components to it, like in that case there was an octave. We knew it had this octave component and it had this big reverby component and it had this angry fuzz. And if we try to achieve an angry enough fuzz, it's going to kind of blur our octave sound a bit, so it's splitting it out so that we have the octave a bit more isolated. But that we just wanted a fat rhythm tone, and we could have stacked it up, but I don't think it would have sounded as punchy if we'd added more guitars to that.
Probably would have been less defined.
Yeah.
But I think there's one, so to round off the guitars, I think, and in fact just generally the overview of the mix, for me I think one of the densest parts of the whole song that has guitars, loads of heavy bass, there's synth, there's even bass synth and lead lines, and Ben having it, is the end of the song.
Yeah.
Where it after the drop. So we go into like a nice chordy kind of epic chord out. It's even named Epic Chord Outro.
Yeah, should we just have a...
That's for me where I think is a great opportunity to look at the layers of synth and things that give you the colossal sound.
Where are we? Yeah, so we've had Colossus Riff. Probably spelt wrong, knowing me. Yeah, so it's all building here. Yeah, so
Sounds like a different song.
those are some of the layers there. So I think guitar-wise, the main ones you've got, it's those main heavy rhythm guitars. It's done on the same track as that last part we were looking for. So looking through, that's our main sound really, our main rhythm sound. That's kind of where all the teeth are coming from.
Yeah.
And then we got this picky guy. Okay.
That's really interesting. I don't remember tracking those two separately.
Yeah, I think that was just done to pick out.
Because I've made it in a way.
Detail.
When I play live, it's a combination of the two.
Yeah.
And that must be because that's what we tracked. And then I went, I should really do it like that. It's really interesting. Because then you hear the synth layers and stuff. They're actually just accenting certain strings that I'm sounding in particularly in these tracks. The kind of da da da. I play that on the guitar.
That's it. Cause this was the part where because Beer played pretty much all the synth on this record, but there were two parts that I think I came up with, and that was one of them because I was hearing that in it, and I was like, is something doing that? And I couldn't get away from it, so I had to kind of put that down when I sent a mix over, and it stuck. So that was. Yeah, it just picked out that melody a little bit.
And we actually used, because at the synth at the studios, when you said to do it and went in to play it in, and I remember we had the synth running through, it's a Moog Sub 37, and we had it running through a Kraken, and then we had it running through the Moog pedal direct, I believe.
Yeah, for some of the lower things, I wonder if that one...
I'm pretty sure that was...
I think I might have done that one on my little MIDI keyboard at
really?
home. Yeah, I think that was a different one. But your lower stuff was definitely...
It was a Kraken.
Yeah.
Through a guitar cab.
I think that's one I kept banging on about. I remember thinking when we listened back to all the mixes at the end of the recording session, and I was like, I have to at least try putting that in there.
So what might be cool is to, step by step, add these to this ending. Because there's a sub-synth is there somewhere, isn't there?
There's a sub-synth, and there's these beef guitars again doing the... It's just bringing out the claw a little bit. These were the other synths that were on there. That's the old
Sub 37.
Sub 37 going through guitar amps, which we did down there at the time. Yeah, that adds a load of body. I'll play it without that. Gives it some.
It's subtle, but it's the weight. It's when it drops to that low A, you can hear like an underneath the whole mix is this like sub.
Yeah, just a bowl. Okay, so should we just listen to that section and I'll just kind of put things in and see how they stack up. So.
that really puts into perspective how each element is so vital to the final product
Yeah.
that you just don't really take into consideration when you go in to record something.
Yeah,
Well, you will, but not me.
Yeah. So for now, I think that kind of gives us a good overview of
Yeah.
what's going on in there without going into uber detail on individual stuff.
Yeah, for sure. It feels like to me, the key points that I'm going to take away and for my own mixing and engineering side of things is how like there are certain. It feels like key elements for you are you have to get the character of each instrument first. Make sure that that's right and it's referencing the kind of live sound. It feels like, and then it's almost like picking it into pieces and working out how to engineer the sound of those pieces that ultimately make up
Yeah, totally.
the sound of each member,
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of breaking it all apart and putting it back together in a way that's going to make sense in a record, I suppose, isn't it? Because we're kind of generally trying to shoot for that big live show kind of sound.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if this guitar's got a component, like we were saying before, if it's got a component that's, say, a sub under a fuzz,
yeah,
why not try and make that the best sounding sub guitar element and then the best sounding fuzz, and rather than too much compromise.
yeah. Because you see, if I went, I'm going to track in an octave guitar part now, I'd get a gain tone and I'd dial in the octave and then I'd track it. But what I'm going to attempt to do now is get a nice guitar tone, track it, and then a separate track with my sub guitar sound that complements it and reinforces it, and I've got control over the two.
Yeah, that's it. And it can be done in layers like that, but you could also, it's important to remember that it's not always necessary to add another performance. This can be achieved in terms of, if you had two amps, say, if your riff was the kind of riff that was, say, a single note riff, then you want it to sound punchy and bold. So maybe if you added a sub one on top of it, it would sound cool, but it might, start to blur a little bit just because they're two performances. So if you had a 2 amp rig, or you're working in the box and you can achieve a kind of simulation of a 2 amp rig, you could have just a dialed in octave sound on one and then the fuzz on the other, and then you've got that. It's about achieving that separation, I think, isn't it? More than anything.
And it feels like, having just looked at everything that you've done over the course of mixing it, it looks like each element of the band, there's a not like a secret sauce, but there's like, you'll get your drum and your bass and your guitar tones, and then there's like, for each of those there's a respective thing that you add to it, whether it be like room ambience, or whether it be an underbelly of sub, or whether it be some sort of like reverb or effect that ultimately ties it all together for itself. But then when you pull it together for everything, it sounds like everyone's in the same room playing at the same time.
It sucks it all together, yeah.
So that's really eye-opening for me.
Oh, cool.
Personally, even though I was there when we recorded it and when we mixed it, I still didn't know you'd done all of that stuff. So watching it back now, I was like, nice.
Cool.
Whew. That was intense.
Yeah. So I hope some of that made sense and you got something out of that. That was pretty fun, looking back over it. And as I said before, if there's anything you want to hear more in depth, more specifically, not necessarily just this song, the guys have very nicely given me permission to have a route around in some of the other mixes as well. So yeah, we can look into some more specific stuff or some other tunes later down the line. Let me know in the comments section. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And letting me and everyone else have a look through the tracks.
Yeah, really man, cool. My pleasure. And also, if you're in a band and you need someone to engineer and mix your music, you should ask Mark, because in my opinion, he's probably one of the best engineer, mixer, producers of this kind of modern rock, hard rock, heavy metal kind of alternative world where it sounds really organic but really powerful, and just like, you do a great job. So yeah, definitely look him up.
Man. Thank you.
He's got a right set of ears on him, that lad.
Some right ears, left ears.
Just 2 left ears.
2 left ears. That's the actual secret. 2 left ears. Bye.